how do we make sure that wealth and prosperity kind of technologies of the future is here? It happens here in America. The way that it happens is if we ensure true competition in the marketplace, that small business people, entrepreneurs, innovators, people like yourselves can grow a business and prosper without having to fear some large corporation stomping all over you and becoming an impediment to your survival. So I view your agency as like crucial in winning the competition. So I just want to say thank you for everything that you do, and I really look forward to your remarks today.
Well, let me bounce it back to you. In addition to chairing the Select Committee on China, you're a ranking member on an investigative committee, and you did a lot of deep dive work of looking at concentrated markets, especially in meatpacking and food sector. What did you find when you did that, when you led that investigation?
This was right in the middle of the pandemic. Thank you for bringing that up, Robert. When we were in the majority, I was the chair of the subcommittee on economic and consumer policy, and we did an investigation with regard to the rental car industry, the shipping industry, the meatpacking industry, and the oil and gas industry. And guess what? Inflation, of course, was on the rise at that time in the middle of the pandemic, but their profits were through the roof. Absolutely through the roof. I think in rental cars, it was like 600% increase in profits. In shipping, 300%. In other industries, like 30,000% explosion in profits. And it was very clear that they were basically using inflation as a cover to raise prices. And that's what I fear they're doing now. They're continuing to do in certain places, even though, as Chair Khan mentioned, the supply chain issues have largely resolved. And so in that type of situation, you can't but conclude that there's some greedflation happening, some price gouging happening. And some of them know their market power. I wrote this down just to remember what the quote was, but the CEO of Cottonelle, which is a large producer of toilet paper, said that, he said, if the price goes up on toilet paper, generally doesn't mean that you're going to use the bathroom any less. And that's exactly the perspective that some of these CEOs have, that the demand is going to stay the same, just jack up the prices, and we'll make more money. And that's wrong.
Can you elaborate on that? Have you seen that in either in food sector or otherwise, this idea that there's an increment that the companies are taking as pure profit taking on top of whatever underlying inflation there is?
Well, I'll say a couple of things. First is, the Congressman noted a few sectors that they were investigating. Each of those sectors represents a market where we've seen for decades more and more consolidation. And it's really one of the more underappreciated trends that we've seen in our economy, where 3 or 4 decades ago you had markets with dozens of competitors. Now increasingly you just see a handful of dominant companies control most of the market. And so that's really what creates the opportunity to do the types of tactics that the Congressman was talking about. Just to give a concrete example, take meatpacking. Meatpacking, chicken processing, these are markets where you have thousands of farmers, millions of consumers, but they're just connected by a handful of meat packers or chicken processors. And over the years, we've seen in the data that farmers' income has been going down, even as consumers are paying more. And so that means that it's these middlemen that are taking a bigger and bigger cut. And if there was more competition in the market, I assume that they wouldn't be able to do that as easily. It's really because there is so much concentration, and in some parts of the country, farmers are literally dependent on just a single company to be able to get to market, and then firms are able to use that power to, keep more and more of the cut. So there's definitely a connection in the empirical research between growing market consolidation and their ability to take more and more without consumers defecting. Obviously, there are markets where consumers are just much more dependent, and so companies have more ability to do that, be it in healthcare, be it in housing, be it for food and groceries. And so especially when we're talking about the essentials, people oftentimes don't have a choice and have to make sacrifices everywhere else. Think about diapers, think about laundry detergents. I mean, these are markets where even if you go to the grocery store and see dozens of brands, they're actually just controlled by a very small number of companies. And so there can even be this illusion of choice that can mask the extent of consolidation in the market.
Well, we're in a union hall, and you're raising this, but I want to preface before I ask the question to both of you. So there's some things that Chair Khan can't talk about today. She can't talk about matters that are directly before the FTC or where they're involved in ongoing litigation. So those of you in the pharmacy business, there's some things you might want her to say or wish that you could get inside of her head and not be able to talk about this.
I can say it.
You can. And we're going to get there. I'm not going to deny you that opportunity. But before we go to healthcare, what is the relationship between consolidation, where there's fewer and fewer companies in the market, and worker rights? So people think about it as a consumer issue, which it is, but how's it a worker issue too? Or how do you see it to be a worker issue also?
So it's a really good question, and basically the same principle applies, right? When you have companies that are having to compete for your business, they're gonna try to elbow each other and make sure they're reducing the price, making the service better. The same goes for when they're looking to compete for your labor. They're going to be incentivized to try to attract more workers by raising wages, by offering better benefits, by offering a more safe workplace. And so we've seen that as markets have become more consolidating, including labor markets, wages have stagnated or sometimes even go down because employers don't have to compete. As we do our merger investigations, sometimes we see that companies are directly looking at one another and saying, well, that employer just went to $15 an hour, so I guess that's going to mean that we have to do that as well. So competition is good for workers, and so if we see mergers that are going to illegally reduce that competition for workers, the FTC takes action. We also recently finalized a rule that would ban non-compete clauses. These are clauses that employers include in your contract that say, even once you leave this job, I'm going to restrict your ability to go work for somebody else. And these are contracts that started off in the boardroom but have really proliferated, and so they apply to 30 million Americans, people who work in fast food, security guards, janitors, journalists, healthcare workers, scientists. I mean, it's really expanded across the economy and is having a really negative impact on people's wages, on people's ability to have a good idea and go start their own business. And so we finalized a rule that would eliminate these non-compete clauses in the vast majority of employment contracts. We got sued by some big business groups, and so a judge in Texas has currently pressed pause on the rule being able to go into effect. But we're still moving forward with litigation, and so we'll see where that ends. But it just really underscores that competition in labor markets is really important for workers as well.
No, I would just add, when we looked at the meatpacking industry and what was happening during the pandemic, because of the consolidation, there was four meatpackers that account for most of the market share, and they just had atrocious working conditions, and as a consequence, so many of their workers died. They caught COVID, and then it spread like wildfire, and then they died. And so these are life and death types of matters when you don't have enough competition. I think if there's one thing I hope everybody leaves this room with, it's the idea that you always want to have competition in every single market, whether it's a labor market, whether it's selling goods and services, and that, to me, that's kind of the secret sauce of America, really. And that's really what differentiates us from the rest of the world, but you have to kind of really preserve that competition and fight off every attempt to chip away at it. I'm just going to comment on one thing, since I see my white-coated friends, and Lina can't necessarily comment on this a lot, but when she was talking about the 4 or 5 meat processors who stand between the tens of thousands of farmers and the tens of thousands of consumers, I often think about independent pharmacies. Independent pharmacies are between, essentially the drug manufacturers and the consumers, but there's one other layer, which are these 4 or 5 pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs. I think they stand for actually pretty big markups. Because what they do is they basically use their market power to kill off independent pharmacies in favor of their own pharmacies that they own because they're vertically integrating. And then on top of that, they drive up drug costs because, again, because of the fact that they have a rebate system, a weird way where they basically earn rebates by taking a percentage off of revenues earned through list prices. And so guess what? List prices go up because then they make more money in the rebates. And so what you're seeing over and over again in this industry in PBMs is, you're seeing again, competition go down, prices go up, quality of service go down, and you're seeing independent pharmacy closures go down. One thing is going up though, PBM CEO pay through the roof. And so that to me is an indication again of a problematic situation.
Congressman, I thank all the independent pharmacists for being here for 2 reasons. The work you do every day is one thing, regardless who you work for. I represent pharmacy techs. I don't have any pharmacists. But during the pandemic, you were all there working, weren't you?
Yeah.
Every day. As my members were in the grocery stores working every single day without harm to their own personal safety, and they had the masks on and everything else, and I get it all. So I want to thank all of you, but your PBM comments are absolutely right. I was going to say something, I better not. It's something that has to be done in America because they're gouging Americans on the price of the drugs. The fill prices that you guys have to do and keep up with this and everything else, I get it. But your comments are right on, Congressman. But I had to say something to these pharmacists in the room that were in the pandemic like my members. Every single day. They were American heroes back in the day. No, you're not. And I think that's bullshit. Just saying. Sorry. I hate to say it.
And the same to all the food workers. They stayed out there. They kept people fed. They're heroes as well.
I agree with
Without
you. I didn't mean to throw you off.
It's place's name for you. You can do whatever you want. I appreciate that, and I think it's, one thing that comes out of your comments, Congressman, and these comments is these issues that can, and Chair Khan knows this because she's been proselytizing for why these things that seem abstract actually matter in day-to-day lives. And you all are here thinking about how it matters for your businesses and your viability, but even just in the people's health. And if we think back on the pandemic, which we've collectively got some PTSD, we don't want to really think about like it happened 100 years ago, but it wasn't. And to think about the intersection between the recklessness with which people were put in harm's way. Meatpacking's got to be the worst, and nursing homes are the next. And how that intersects with the consolidation is concentrated corporate control and lack of balance in the economy. It's quite a shocking thing. Well, I want to ask some questions about what we can do about all these things in a second. And you jumped ahead on the PBM question. You couldn't hold back. So we got that. Well, let's transition to a problem and a solution. And Chair Khan, I wanted to sort of just lean in on a specific case of asthma inhalers. So some of you are from out of the area. Some of you must be from Chicago. Chicago's got very high rates of childhood asthma, like 50% higher than the national average. 1 in 6 kids. And asthma inhalers are priced, or were, through the roof for things that are like nothing, right?
Yes.
Okay. But your agency, the administration, and Congress have done some things about this. Can you tell us the story?
So inhalers have been around for decades, but we've seen the prices have stayed high I mean, inhalers out of pocket can still cost $500, $600, which is pretty wild. And one question our team had was, why haven't generics been able to make more of an impact in this market? Why people don't have as much access to generics? And we took a look at this kind of obscure repository called the Orange Book, where manufacturers can list patents that then automatically get them to block generic rivals from the market. And you're only supposed to list in this Orange Book patents for drug ingredients, effectively. But what we saw was that some of these manufacturers were listing patents for things like the cap on the inhaler or the dosage counter. Same for things like EpiPens. I mean, patents for nothing to do with the actual formulation of the drug or the drug ingredients, but actually with regards to the device. And so we sent out letters to the manufacturers challenging hundreds of patents that were listed, we believe improperly. In the context of asthma inhalers, 3 of the 4 big manufacturers have announced that they're going to now drop how much Americans pay out of pocket, down from hundreds of dollars to just $35, which is a really big win, and we're really excited about it, but also kind of outraged. Like, how has it been for years? People have just gotten away with charging hundreds of dollars for these inhalers that should have been a lot cheaper. We had some great partnership from members of Congress, the Senate Health Committee, folks in the House who really partnered up with us and started asking some hard questions of these manufacturers. So there's more work to be done there, but it was a good example of how, especially in the patent system, there could be all sorts of mischief that is actually inflating drug prices. The patent system is really important, right? It's designed to incentivize innovation and make sure that people that have innovative ideas are rewarded for that. But there's also supposed to be a time when the patents expire and generics can come onto the market, and especially when we're talking about medicines, I mean, you all know that's absolutely essential. So the FTC more generally has been scrutinizing what are tactics by manufacturers that are improperly extending the life of the patent, be it through things like Orange Book listings, be it through things like evergreening or patent ticketing. And then we're also focused on, even once the patent expires, are there tactics that the manufacturers are using to keep generics or biosimilars from getting a major foothold in the market? So we see things like pay for delay agreements where the manufacturers are actually paying off the generics. We see, certain rebating tactics, all sorts of things, and so we're scrutinizing those patenting issues very closely.
Well, Congressman, let's go big picture and thinking about what should you control Congress, which we all wish you did. What should Congress be doing to deal with these broad issues we're talking about in consolidation?
Well, one thing that I was talking to Chair Khan about is I still don't understand exactly the jurisdiction that FTC has versus DOJ, and it feels a little bit confusing from Congress's standpoint sometimes. All that being said, I think that if there are ways to empower the FTC and DOJ to be able to do their jobs, maybe a little easier, maybe without jumping through so many hoops sometimes in terms of, I think at one point Chair Khan told me she has to wait for another agency to decide whether they're going to prosecute or pass on the opportunity, and then it could come back to her and she can take the baton and prosecute. Meanwhile, a lot of people are injured in the process or waiting for remediation. So that might be an area to look at to kind of speed things up. Another area is what can be done to enable maybe private consumers, empower them to be almost private attorneys general in certain cases. I mean, we don't want it to kind of become something that is abused, but like something where an independent pharmacy, banding together with others, or consumers who, for instance, were denied access to a drug because it wasn't on the formulary that a PBM put together to line its own pockets as opposed to help improve the lives of these patients, that person could sue. I don't know if they can now. I'm not positive. But I feel like that could be a reform where we introduce the ability for people, everyday people who are harmed, to band together to protect themselves as well?
I can answer your question.
Oh, okay, good.
It's
Yeah.
not so doable.
Okay.
And it would be great for Congress to do something about it. There are a few problems. It's really hard for consumers ever to bring antitrust cases because they're not thought to be the victims, just producers. Then it's hard for small producers as well because of these forced arbitration provisions in contracts, so you can't band together often. And even when you can, the courts have said, well, they've interpreted what's standing when people have a right to bring a case. So actually, there's a whole set of things for Congress to do to make it possible for there to be
I feel
more
like
private enforcement.
So maybe it's a question to Lina as well, but like, you know, I have all these cases. I'm sure that all these folks have cases where somebody comes to them and says, you know, I've been injured as a patient or as a consumer or something like that. Do you feel that you know, giving them, empowering them in some way could assist you in fulfilling your mission? Or do you think it would just create chaos or something like that? Or just clog the courts with more litigation?
I mean, private rights of action are incredibly important, and parts of the antitrust laws do have those private rights of action to empower people, to empower state AGs to be able to bring these cases. Also as a kind of insurance against the federal government. If the federal government, you know, ever takes its foot off the pedal, we want to make sure that that doesn't mean that antitrust lawsuits go away. And historically, private litigation has played an incredibly important role in actually getting the federal government to act. So even with things like, you know, the big tobacco litigation, it was actually the state AGs and private litigation that got that going, then ended up exposing a lot of documents that then let the federal government come in and build a much bigger case. So absolutely, private rights of action, empowering people to bring cases is important. One other hurdle that I'll mention in addition to the ones Rob mentioned is courts have made it incredibly expensive to litigate antitrust cases. I mean, it's not just about hiring a lawyer. You also oftentimes have to hire an economist that will charge millions of dollars to do the economic analysis. And what's perverse is that sometimes judges say, okay, this side has their fancy economist, this side has their fancy economist, and they kind of cancel each other out. And so the expensive economists are not even necessarily helping the judge, but it's just making the litigation more and more expensive. That applies to the agencies as well. I mean, we spend a non-trivial part of our budget paid to these economists because we have to. And so I would say Congress also changing the law in ways that makes it less expensive to bring these cases is going to be important too.
I'd like to make, if I may, one comment. Rob brought it up. What can we do? By the way, I represent, the honor of representing Local 881 for 40 years and other UFCW locals and their benefit funds. And I've been part of antitrust drug cases where we've been suing the drug manufacturers on prices that we're overpaying in our benefit funds, and they've come up with every way to, from pay to delay. We've had those cases, but putting aside all that, and actually I'm going to direct this to Steve because I think one of the answers, at least in Illinois, is legislation in this state. We have a very friendly state, similar to what they have in California, where the California Insurance Commission permits in healthcare, it's a form of whistleblower action in California. You don't have to be, the whistleblower can be anybody. It could be a tree, almost. California gives standing to just about everybody. And so I would say in Illinois we can start bringing, if we had that kind of legislation. And, until Congressman becomes the House Speaker, we may never see him use that in Congress.
He's not going there, I know where he's going.
Or something in the middle, but I think we can start here, and that's where a lot of the legislation has to come from on the state levels. And I'll have a conversation with Steve about the California legislation. So there are things that we're all trying to do, and the chair has been doing amazing stuff.
We have a few few more minutes. I want to, Chair, ask you a couple of questions. This one you can't answer, you just say you can't answer it. So, the agency has brought a bunch of challenges to mergers. Are there any that you're able to talk about where you succeeded and explain what was behind it and what the benefit would be to the American people? Or
So we've brought over a half dozen litigations and lawsuits seeking to block hospital mergers. Hospital mergers have actually been a huge driver of some of the inflated healthcare costs that we've seen. I mean, across the country, there have been so much consolidation among hospitals. Sometimes it's necessary because the hospital would otherwise go out of business, but unfortunately, all too often, we see that some of these mergers would actually drive up costs while making the quality of service worse. And so we've blocked, over a half dozen of these in the last few years. We've also stopped some big mergers in the pharmaceutical industry. And just to give you one example, last year we sued to block this big pharma company, Sanofi's attempted acquisition of a drug by Maze. Sanofi was granted a monopoly for a drug for Pompe disease, which you all know is this horrible degenerative disease where people's muscles basically start degenerating. People who have Pompe disease are dependent on these core medicines. Out of pocket, these medicines can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. People have to go get IVs pretty regularly. Maze had been developing a tablet, basically something you could take orally. And so it could be a game changer for these patients in terms of the ease of delivery. We worried when we investigated this merger that if you allow the existing monopolist with this drug to buy up an up-and-coming developer, it really wouldn't have an incentive to ensure that Maze's drug was making it onto the market quickly, because they already have this pretty comfortable revenue line, and why would they want to disrupt that? So we filed a lawsuit. Sanofi ended up abandoning the acquisition, and Maze actually ended up partnering up with a company that doesn't have a presence in this market, and they're going to be able to actually bring Maze to market more quickly to a wider population. And so that was a really important document for us. In the context of pharma mergers, the FTC's philosophy more recently was not to actually block these deals necessarily, and instead to require certain types of divestitures. We've taken the position that, oftentimes the best thing to do is block these deals if the divestiture is not going to work. But we've been very active in, areas like semiconductors and areas like food and groceries. And so making sure that we're stopping excessive consolidation on the front end is so important to make sure these problems don't exist in the first place.
I'll just editorialize so the little comment that you made before Chair Khan came in. Almost every major merger was approved, but what the agency would do is say, make a little tweak, sell off this little thing, spin off this. And at the end of the day, it didn't make much difference. Hospitals was once were accepting that, but by and large that was true. And now it's just a whole new approach. And in addition to these cases and some that are ongoing that you can't talk about, what everybody's reporting in Washington from the companies is they don't start the merger in the first place because they know they don't rubber stamp anymore at the FTC. So it's been really quite transformational in that way. I wanted to ask you one more. So I think, from my point of view, your presentations cover this, but you're getting some pushback, which maybe is good faith or maybe isn't, that the approach you're taking is ideologically driven, or maybe you're trying to serve a party. Right? What would you say is the way you've been guiding the agency? How do you respond to this idea that you've got just this crazy ideology that you're trying to inflict on the country?
So what's driving the work at the FTC is reality, right? I mean, what's really been a key driver of this reorientation is the empirical reality around us, where we've seen firsthand that allowing market after market to consolidate doesn't just mean that people are paying more and making less, but it means you create major fragilities so that you have shortages in critical areas. And so that's why we've seen actually a whole of government effort under the Biden-Harris administration to making sure we are redoubling our commitment to competition, especially as we think about internationally, how do we make sure that America continues to stay ahead? And we've seen decade after decade, it's been when America has doubled down on its commitment to fair competition that breakthrough ideas are allowed to come to market. right? I mean, we want an economy where if you have a good idea, you're able to bring that idea to market and actually compete and scale and get out ahead, rather than allowing the existing big guys to kind of pull up the ladder behind them at the expense of American innovation. So that's really what's driving all of this work. And it's been really gratifying to see, already some wins, but obviously a lot more to do.
Well, I think the best, can you hear me? I think the best evidence that I don't think this is an ideological agenda is that I've heard praise from obviously Democrats, but even J.D. Vance has said nice things about Lina Khan, I think. I'm not positive about that. And I'm not sure whether you accept them, but that's another issue. But the point is that people on both sides have taken note. Like, fundamentally, this is about, to me, competition is a celebration of free markets. It's a celebration of capitalism. It's about what is the best form of free enterprise that we can have that, I believe serves the best interest of the American people. And I think the FTC, in doing what it's doing now, is really trying to enable us to be the best version of ourselves, right? And so if we can be that best version of ourselves, then I have no doubt that we can not only compete, but win any competition against any adversary or any country that would seek to overtake us economically. And I just want to say that, it's ultimately, to me, about, people in this room, the UFCW workers, who are doing everything they can every day to, serve our communities. It's about I keep calling you my white-coated friend, but my pharmacy, independent pharmacies, who, quite frankly, Lina, in some communities, they're not only the pharmacy, they happen to be the grocery store. They happen to be serving a number of other functions, healthcare clinic, because you know what? The Walmart didn't want to locate nearby anymore because there's just not enough business for them. And the chain pharmacy closed up shop because it's not in their it's not in the best interest of their bottom line. But these folks decided to stay, and they're doing everything pretty much from soup to nuts. So thank you for what you guys are doing, and thank you for helping them to flourish.
Well, I really appreciate your mentioning the bipartisanship around this, because it's absolutely true. I mean, I have to kind of go testify before Congress now and then, and it's really striking the degree to which you actually do see members on both sides of the aisle worried about extreme consolidation. We actually hear in particular from members of Congress representing rural areas about the worry that independent pharmacists are getting squeezed, that independent grocers are getting squeezed, because they're big middlemen that may not be giving them a fair shake. And so it's absolutely true that we see that concern on all sides. You mentioned how competition is really about making sure free markets are free, and it's also just about people's daily freedom, right? Economic freedom, and so it really is deeply embedded in our country's tradition, and so that's what we're looking to realize as well.
And it's also, as your comments are saying, illustrating, it's about community, right? So when these independent businesses, whether it's pharmacies or even independent post offices,
Yes.
right, are these institutional pillars. And when you have this sort of big corporate mindset that overrides them, you destroy these institutions that uphold the community, whether it's the grocer or the pharmacist or the post office. Let's squeeze in a quick couple more. Big tech, social media, you've been doing a ton of work, everybody's a parent, they know what's going on. Your office said I should ask you this question. This is a super tough question for you. Yeah, get ready, because it's going to be really, you can be sure they gave you a hard one. So, we've had a no regulatory system for social media, and the companies sort of gave the promise, trust us. And my question for you, which I'm just going to be open because I would never ask this because it's too much of a softball.
Okay.
How's that worked out for us?
Lina, you want to go first?
That's a tough one for you, Rick.
Well, it didn't work out too well. It turns out that when you don't regulate social media companies, not only are they collecting information about you that you don't know, not only are they selling that information about you that, again, you never consented to. But it turns out in the case of certain apps, which I can't really go into, they're controlled by foreign adversary governments. And so that could be weaponized against you. And that then brings about the question of national security, which is a separate topic. But I think that we're kind of in this situation where Congress should have acted years and years and years ago. But we didn't a long time ago because we wanted innovation to happen here. We thought, okay, if we over-regulate, we're going to somehow prevent the creation of a thriving and flourishing tech sector. But those days are gone. And now we know it's time to act. And now we're kind of laggards in the world on this particular issue of online privacy for everybody, but specifically kids. And so in Congress, we're trying to do our best to come together on this issue. It's kind of challenging because of different constituencies, but it's also challenging because big tech is very, very powerful in Washington, D.C. I've taken on a company or two in the last 4 terms. I'm seeking my 5th term coming up in 33 days, seeking my high 5. At this point, we have to do the right thing. So I know that Chair Khan has been doing a lot of work in this area, but we have to protect our kids, we have to protect our data, we have to protect everybody at this point.
I mean, Congressman's absolutely right, and basically what happened was the government allowed a business model to take hold that monetizes everybody's personal data, and that has incentivized the endless hoovering up of people's sensitive data. This data is now freely bought and sold by data brokers. I mean, there's wild, wild west of what can happen with your data. And sometimes ideas like privacy can seem pretty abstract, but we've found through our investigations that we're talking about really sensitive data. I mean, we're talking about health data when people are using certain apps. We're talking about geolocation data that your phone's collecting that can be bought and sold and empowers stalking and all sorts of dangerous conditions. People's browsing data, everything you're searching for, everything you're doing on the internet. So really personal types of people's data. And oftentimes there are very, very few guardrails on what can be done with it. We've also now started an inquiry into this idea of surveillance pricing, because now that all of this data exists, companies in theory could have the ability to charge each person a different price based on what they know about. And so imagine a situation where you've had a death in the family and need to fly to get to a funeral, and the airline knows that, and so can hike the price, right? I mean, we're really on the cusp potentially of fundamentally different form of pricing, where it's no longer the case that every person is being charged the same price for the same product. And so the FTC launched an inquiry into that to try to look under the hood and make sure, is this happening? To what extent is it happening? Which businesses are doing it? So that we actually empower policymakers to decide, is this the future that we actually want, or do we want to have some protections in place? But I think it just illustrates that this idea of privacy is not really abstract. It can materially impact people in their pocketbooks. The other thing I'll just note about kids' privacy, the Surgeon General of the United States has issued a warning, basically identifying social media as posing a major danger to children and young people without any guardrails, and so that's something that we're following as well.
And to hide yet another aspect of this consolidation problem, which is the political power that big companies get. So at some point it becomes really, really hard to impose the controls because it becomes so big and powerful that even when everybody really knows something needs to be done, it's hard to muster the political coalition to get across the finish line.
Oh, totally. Like, we can go back to the PBM situation. Like, I have been railing against PBMs and in favor of legislation for years and years. I have some Republican colleagues who've been fighting with me, and everybody seems to nod their head yes with regard to reforming the system. But then when it comes time to bring in legislation, it's like dead. You know, we can't seem to get a markup on legislation. We can't seem to bring it to the floor. We can't seem to get movement. And so there's like an unseen power that some of these industries have that, you know, we're trying to wrap our arms around. But with concerted effort, I feel that we can get past this. Recently, I had some legislation regarding a little-known app named TikTok. You might have heard about. In that, my colleague Mike Gallagher, a Republican from Wisconsin, and I, we worked tirelessly against, you know, the lobbyists for TikTok, their in-house counsel, their friends, the ByteDance Corporation, which owns them, and then even the Chinese government, which lobbied against it. And it seemed like we were up against the world, but we won. We won because we were able to band together as Democrats and Republicans, as Americans, coming together as opposed to being partisans. And then we got the grassroots involved as well in our advocacy campaigns. And I think that's what we're going to need with regard to all of these issues as we help Chair Khan from a legislative standpoint to kind of correct for some of the problems. And, you know, with regard to the mergers and the grocery industry and so forth.
We're not going to talk about that.
We're not going to talk about it, but I'll just make indirect reference that, you know, we have to kind of inform the grassroots. That's where it starts. You know, we have this jewel that I go to with my wife all the time, and, you know, UFCW happens to be the workforce there. They're the finest people. They're the best workers. I'm starting to sound like Donald Trump. They're the best people in the best store.
You start something like that, I'll talk to you.
It would be such a tragedy to lose that kind of a store because of consolidation. You know, that such, you know, this upcoming merger might have. But that's where the grassroots has to get involved. You know, if we have to write postcards, we write postcards. If we have to, you know, do whatever.
Op-eds?
You know, op-eds. And like op-eds like you and I wrote. We'll do it.
Hey, we've got a question here from the young man in the white coat. That's what I was saying.
Thank you very much.
He understands.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Garth Reynolds. I'm the Executive Director for the Illinois Pharmacists Association. Thank you again, Chair Khan and Congressman Krishnamoorthi and the UFCW for allowing us to be here. Part of my career also was working at not an independent family pharmacy, but grocery store pharmacy, working with UFCW 655 in St. Louis was a majority of my career. So I really appreciate
Are you a CVS guy?
Do what, I'm sorry?
Are you a CVS person in
No.
Stokes?
No.
No.
I was with Givers Market.
Yeah, Dearburgh.
Yeah.
We've got them down south.
Yep.
That's why I was asking.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I know where you're going. But no, it's just with Congressman, you were really hitting on kind of where my question was starting to go. But you know, we're really at a crisis point with pharmacy right now. We've got recent data showing over 2,200 pharmacies closing across the country this year. 74 of those in Illinois. We're already looking at possibly that's going to excel, unfortunately, over 100 by the end of this year. We're to a point where we're trying, you know, pharmacists are having to make the decision, do I take care of my patient or do I make sure that I'm able to still make payroll this week? That's not where healthcare ever should have gotten to, and that's where we're at. And Chair Khan, I really appreciate what you and the FTC have done, and I know you really can't comment on a lot of what's going on, but with that said, one of the questions we always get from pharmacists, and I even get it from my students, is because this is a different advocacy approach that pharmacy has never been in. How can we best support the FTC in its efforts right now? And how can we help provide additional support to you and what the FTC is doing? And if that's through the Congressman, you know, that's great, but you know, we're just trying to find new ways because we've got great sponsors and supporters and microphones like we do with Raja, but we need more to be able to help get this across. Like he said, you know, we sponsored bills, but it hasn't got the markup. And we know there's a lot of regulatory push, and just trying to figure out how do we help with that last oomph to keep pharmacies open, because we're extremely concerned about Medicare 2025 being a failure because pharmacies are not going to be in the support level that's going to be required for the country. And so we're past the point of no return the infrastructure is beyond crumbling right now. Where can we help to help get the fixes in that we need?
Well, I appreciate your sharing all that, and I've been following some of those numbers with a lot of alarm as well. And I'll just say we're acting as swiftly and with as much urgency as we can. I know it can be frustrating to see how slowly things move in DC. I'll say a couple of things. First is we'll make sure we have your contact info so that our teams that are continuing to work on this make sure they can engage with you and understand what is happening on the ground, so we have accurate information. The other thing is, the federal government can act, and as you've seen, where we think it's appropriate to act, we will, and we have more work underway. The states can also be really important players here. State AGs, state legislatures, in terms of, making sure that certain rules are in place to prevent, businesses from engaging in certain tactics. There are some state level litigations that are underway as well, but we're working as swiftly as possible, and maybe the Congressman will have an idea for what to do with Congress.
So I think, obviously, this is in a lawsuit situation, right? So, it would be hard for pharmacists to get involved. But I think what you're doing in Congress is important, but as I said before, I think I'm not involving partisan politics in this because this is a government event, but this is not really a partisan political comment, but it turns out that there's going to be an election in 33 days. So it's time to hold people accountable. And if there's legislation that we want passed on a bipartisan basis, I think you have to bring it to people's attention and ask them, where do you stand? It's just that simple. You may not be a single issue voter, but this might be an issue that you include on your top 3 that they need to take a stand on. And I think I mentioned this to Rupesh and some others the other day, and to Dave, right? That there are 435 people up for re-election in the House, and it's time to go to every single one of them and ask them, where do you stand on this piece of legislation that we need to level the playing field, for instance, or anything else. But this is what this month provides the opportunity to do that no other point in the last 24 months does. And UFCW gets it because they're on the streets right now as we speak, knocking on doors, but this is the time.
Let me ask a final question that follows. I think one thing that's always a worry in these kind of conversations is the focus on really serious problems that are affecting the economy. Can make you leave feeling worse than you came in, that's not the point of the exercise. It's to feel empowered and engaged. So I wanted to offer one comment, which is just to say these two people themselves are doing things that are affirmatively making a difference and addressing these problems. The ones that we're raising and a bunch of related issues that are affecting people around the country. So it's not actually hopeless. And this breakthrough work from the FTC, again, not like we've seen in 40 years, just changing the way business is operating. 4 years not enough to completely turn things around, but pretty dramatic. When you have members who are leading the way on really far-reaching legislation like you're doing, it changes the conversation. We got to win the legislation, but even just pushing it forward makes a difference. Here's the final question. In addition to that, and let's take it out of the electoral context, even though that's hard for you, I know, right now. What has it been, how does it affect your work either directly, personally, or in the overall space you work, to have conversations with people? And how does, we don't talk about the particular case you can't talk about, but how do these inputs inform what the FTC does? How does it inform what Congress does? And how should people engage, maybe this is more a question for you, Congressman, to influence the process in an ongoing way? So we don't just have to sit back and watch big corporations dominate the situation.
Well, it's huge. This informs my, maybe for you too, Chair Khan, but our personal anecdotes. It helps me to have a richer understanding of the challenges that you face and to be able to then translate that and communicate that to my constituents and others, stakeholders, my colleagues, to explain to them why it should matter to them as well. So that's the first one. Secondly is, there really is a structured way in which you do advocacy, that you provide comments for rulemaking, And we didn't get that rule done with Medicare for DIR fees without you guys making a ton of comments on the rule, right? And that was vital. Now of course we go to the next challenge beyond DIR fees. But the point is that in a very structured way, you were able to make a difference on behalf of your clients and others. And I'm sure that Chair Khan might have some ideas as well on how your input matters.
I mean, this type of engagement is absolutely critical. I mean, I think one way that we became so unmoored from, making sure our markets were competitive was because we became very reliant on certain economic theories about how markets work that were divorced from the reality of what mergers lead to, what consolidation leads to. And so making sure that our understanding of how markets work is actually rooted in the reality that you all see day after day is absolutely critical. Just to give a concrete example of how engagement from you all ends up informing our work, a few months into my tenure, we opened a public docket that basically put out a general question that said, tell us about contractual terms that you think might be unfair or unfair methods of competition or coercive. We got thousands of comments. A big chunk of those were actually from independent pharmacists that were identifying all sorts of contractual terms that you all shared and thought were improper. And that directly informed this market inquiry that we launched into the PBMs. And so that's just one, small example of how this type of engagement can inform the FTC's priorities, how we're deciding where to devote our resources. We've now shared an interim study and our findings. There was also a lawsuit that the FTC filed a couple of weeks ago. There's more work underway, and that type of engagement is absolutely critical. In addition to collecting public comments publicly, we also do these regular open commission meetings where anybody from the public can sign up and come talk to the FTC commissioners over Zoom every couple of months to make sure that we're kind of keeping a real touch on the pulse of what's happening.
I'm afraid we're at time. It's been awesome to be with both of you and with all of you, and the passion in the room and what you do is palpable. So we appreciate you. Grab me separately because I'm going to get in trouble if I keep going any longer. Okay. Thank you all very much.
Is that okay? It'll take 2 seconds. I want to thank Rob and his organization for all their hard work they do for consumer issues across the board, just not on pharmacy issues, but across the board. And obviously, Chairman Khan has just been fabulous for us. And Raja, he's our guy. Andrew from day one, and we'll be for day 2. And we really appreciate it. We appreciate you coming to our house to talk about these very important issues. And for all the independent pharmacists, I've got cards to sign for you guys to sign up. But
He's organizing.
you gotta organize, you gotta throw it out there. But anything we can do to help on the PBM issue, I was talking to our attorney, we've got issues with them too, because they just rip us off.
Oh, yeah.
They rip off our members because of the fees they charge, the rebates are all bullshit, in my opinion, because they game the system. And they're taking money out of my members' pockets, your neighborhood, your people that come into your pharmacies, same thing. But I want to thank you for taking your time, and I know how busy you are.
Thank you for hosting us.
But thank you very much, I appreciate it. I'm sorry? Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's here for you guys. Oh, you're soft. Yeah, I just love this drink. And you work for your groups? Yes, I was there. Which one? No, you're one of those guys. No, I've got the Deerberg
Yeah, yeah. I need a picture of you.
Hi there.
Could we have a picture?
Hi. How are you? Did you make your question?
I'll drive up here.
Trifon, honored to meet you. Thank you for supporting us.
Commissioner, good to see you, buddy. Hey, let's do it.
Let's
Yeah.